Hello everyone and welcome back to One Soccer. I'm your host for today, Josh Deming, and today I will be previewing the Vancouver Whitecaps' upcoming Concacaf Champions League campaign, and to help me do that, I'm bringing on a few special guests. The first one is a colleague of mine, Alex Gangue-Ruzic, and the second is J.J. Adams, who I'm very excited to talk to. So hopefully you guys are excited, and if you are, as always, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, and let's get into my conversation with Alex now. Alright, Alex, so I want to start things off with just taking a look at the Whitecaps and seeing how are they prioritizing the CONCACAF Champions League this season.
Absolutely. I think it's an area where the Vancouver Whitecaps are very excited about the CONCACAF Champions League. I think back to sporting director Axel Schuster. A couple times in his first year, he mentioned, I want to get back to the Champions League one day. I think you can tell coming from that German European background where the Champions League is such a big staple in UEFA. There's always this desire to want to do well in the Canadian Championship. One thing you can't fault the Whitecaps with in past years, they didn't always get past, say, CPL teams in the Canadian Championship, but they'd always put out their best 11. So the fact that they were able to finally get over some of those hurdles last year and get here, that's everything they wanted. And I think we're going to see them go and really prioritize doing well in the competition. They want to, showcase themselves in that sort of continental market and prove that they can be a team that, amongst teams in MLS is getting better every year in the CONCACAF Champions League. And now that the Whitecaps have built up a squad filled with prime age players that's relatively deep, that's relatively set at every position, they're going to want to go out and have a run in Champions League. So I think we'll expect strong lineups from them in every game that they play.
The Whitecaps are joining at the round of 16 stage. This is the new format with the CONCACAF Champions League, and after they made this new change in format, you get a lot of interesting draws. Now, the Whitecaps got drawn against Honduran side Real España. I know a lot of people out there will not be overly familiar, but I also know that you did your research, so you want to tell us a little bit about their opponents.
Yeah, the Whitecaps have been drawn with Honduran side Real España, based out of San Pedro Sula, the famed San Pedro Sula, of course. They're a very solid club. Historically, they're actually very strong. They're one of the most decorated clubs in Honduras, especially back in, the 20th century. They won a lot of titles. They've come up upon a little quieter times recently. Mostly these days they were a 4th, 5th, 6th place team in the 10 to 12 team Honduran league. So they'd kind of fallen off of maybe some of the past glory. They had a phenomenal season last year. They won both the Apertura and the Clausura, finished top of the table for both, obviously earning their spot in the Champions League. And I think they're going to be very excited to be back. They've fallen a bit this year. They're currently sitting in 4th through the early starts of the Honduran season, still just very much in its infancy for 2023. But I think the fact that they were so solid last year, and they're going to look to build off of that, it makes them a very intriguing opponent, because Honduras teams always do well in Champions League. Teams will recognize the likes of Olimpia and Motagua as teams that are always tough, and Olimpia in particular always known for going on runs. So Real España will look to replicate that.
Now, because again, this new format with the CONCACAF Champions League, a lot of the times the draw can be the difference maker or not. It's whether you get an easy draw or an easy path to the final. The Whitecaps had a pretty favorable draw. It sets them up pretty nicely to hopefully get through this stage and on to the next, where they could potentially face LAFC. Do you think having a draw like this that seems a little bit nicer on paper puts a little bit more added pressure to the players?
Yeah, I think this is a very good draw for an MLS team, because historically in recent years, teams have done well against Hondurans, Costa Ricans, El Salvador teams from MLS, just because, the level of team there, a lot of them aren't able to match just the sheer spend, of course, of MLS and the rapidly improving level. So it's been a very favorable matchup for them, especially in early rounds. And I think for the Whitecaps, that's good, because of the Canadian Championship winner, their draw could be a little different, as we saw CF Montreal, because technically Liga MX teams and MLS teams can't meet in early rounds. CONCACAF made that so, for regional purposes, but also I imagine for TV purposes, you want those battles in later rounds. But as the Canadian Championship winners, the Whitecaps are on the side of the draw where they can get Liga MX teams. And that's what happened with Montreal. They drew Santos Laguna in the first round. Of course, they won that, but that's not a matchup you'd want. So for the Whitecaps, the fact that they avoided the Liga MX teams is good, because those teams are deeper into the season, and they've already played 5, 6, 7 games, and they've got similarly deep and top end rosters like MLS, whereas, the Honduran league, it's a league that relies a lot more on homegrown and local talent. And, MLS has shown over the years that its level should be able to beat them. So I think that's a good draw to start. And then from there, the fact that you get other MLS teams likely until the semifinals is the earliest they can get a Liga MX team is huge, because at least MLS, teams like LAFC and Philadelphia Union are great, but at least you can compete with them. And then from there, then you play a Liga MX team when you're maybe a little more in form, a little more in season, maybe you've gone on a run, then the confidence will be higher. So for the Whitecaps, that's a pretty much dream scenario, even if the teams aren't easy in front of them.
Yeah, it seemed for a while there that any club coming from Major League Soccer to go into this competition had to avoid the Mexican sides. It's just the way it worked. If you were able to avoid it, you had the opportunity to move on. And if you got them early on, you often saw a lot of early exits. Now, I don't want to get over the fact that playing in Honduras is very difficult. And this tie might make or break it, because the first leg is in Vancouver. Second leg will be in Honduras. How important is it going to be for Vancouver to pick up a result in that first leg, knowing they're going down to a very difficult atmosphere in Honduras?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's important to note that maybe they got a bit unlucky with in the draw, is that they have to play the first leg at home, because typically, it's your Champions League. You might be a bit of nerves. It's been a while since you've been in the competition. Away goals appears very much to be in effect. It was last tournament, and no changes appeared to have been in note for that. So it's going to be tough, because first of all, in leg one, you have to avoid any away goals against, because those are always tough to stomach. And then from there, traveling to Honduras is not easy, especially for a club team. I mean, they're used to traveling a bit more than maybe, say, a national team, or even then, actually, national teams do travel a lot, so disregard that. But, the travel is just so different versus a trip down to Seattle, versus a trip down to Portland, even a jaunt down to LA. Like San Pedro Sula is a long journey. I think of memories where the airport there is very just tough to land in. It's structured in a funny way. And then you go there, of course, the fans are going to be on their hotel the night before. They're going to be booing. It's going to be humid. It's just going to be a hostile atmosphere. And it's not easy to play those sorts of atmospheres, just because at the club level, MLS has a lot of great crowds these days, but it's a different, being in front of loud crowds versus being in hostile crowds. And that's what you get when you're in Honduras. So if it's a sold out stadium, it's going to be tough. So if the Whitecaps can head down there with 2, 3, 4 goals in their pocket, it's a lot easier than heading down there 0-0 and needing a result, say, or down 1-0 or 1-1 and you're down on away goals. So you definitely want to have an advantage when you head there.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, is if you can get confidence going, you don't want to give the opponents even a sniff, because if they do, like you said, hostile crowds can jump on that and put a lot of pressure on your side. But this next question is an interesting one, and it's something that I've been noticing over the past few years with the CONCACAF Champions League, is that there's been a correlation between clubs doing poorly in the Major League Soccer season when they're in the CONCACAF Champions League. We've seen Toronto do it. We've seen LAFC do it. We've recently seen Seattle do it. A almost shoe-in to make the playoffs every year. They went on to win the CONCACAF Champions League, but missed out on MLS playoffs. How do you think Vancouver is going to prioritize the CONCACAF Champions League versus league play? And how do you think the squad rotation could potentially impact both of those things?
It's going to be huge, because the reality of playing in CONCACAF Champions League is that it places a toll. And I think the biggest thing is, in MLS, there's a reality that in the first 5 to 10 games, most teams are easing in. Like, they know it's a long season, especially now so many teams make the playoffs. There's not like a rush to win a lot of early games. Of course there is, but you're not going gung-ho. Whereas, in mid-season and the end of season, the quality of MLS really goes up. But the disadvantage of the Champions League is it's so early on, and it's Champions League. You're going full tilt. You're going mid-season best form. And what that means is, combined with the travel, that intensity, the added rigors of playing more games, it leads to more injuries. It leads to more fatigue. I think you look at Seattle last year, they ended up doing great in Champions League. They got a good balance, but unfortunately they lost Joao Paulo, one of their DPs, and he was arguably their most important player. You lose your most important player over a course of an MLS season, you feel that. You even think of TFC when they made their run again. They did a great job they beat, 2 Mexican teams that year when they made that run to the final and almost beat a third. But what happens is eventually they lost Josie Altidore to that hamstring injury, and that was a huge part of their team, and that's sort of an absence that they suffered. So for the Whitecaps, it's going to be very key to manage just the bodies and understanding the intensity load. Like, if players are starting to fade, even if it's like a Ryan Gauld, don't be afraid to sub them out and use your depth, just because it's one where, yeah, you want to win at all costs, but losing a Ryan Gauld for 4 to 6 months could be just have that toll on your season. So it's going to be very important to use your depth and not be shy to understand the load that some of these players are going to be go under based on the intensity.
Yeah, and what I've seen with those three clubs I mentioned, when Toronto did it, LAFC did it, and Seattle did it, is they got a good result in the Champions League and maybe not so good of a result in MLS, and then it just the mindset almost changes a little bit, and they're like, you know what? All right, well, we're gonna put all our eggs in this basket for right now and see if we can make that comeback. And LAFC came off an incredible season, and they still made the playoffs, but they went from 1st to 7th. Toronto missed out entirely. Seattle missed out entirely. And I'm just curious to see if Sartini ever runs in a situation where he's getting the results in the CONCACAF Champions League, and then all of a sudden it seems like, you know what? This is where all the eggs will be. Now that we've finished the overview of the Whitecaps heading into the Champions League, it is time to switch focus to the players. And who better to talk to than J.J. Adams, who has his hand on the pulse of all things Whitecaps, the players, the fans, everything in between. So let's get into our conversation with JJ now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to bring in JJ Adams. Very excited to meet with JJ. JJ, how you doing?
I'm doing good. First time on the show with you. It's new year, new things. I'm excited. Let's do this.
I like it. And we're talking about the Whitecaps. We're talking about the Champions League campaign, and we're going to look at the player side of things. I just want to get an idea from you. What do you think the players think of this year's Champions League and the prospect of playing in it?
Well, I think they're all very excited. I mean, just not very many teams, not very many players get to play in the Champions League. So to qualify for it is a big thing. It's huge for the club. It's something that they've done now 3 times in their history. It's not that many times they've actually played these games. So when it comes along, it's going to be, something for the players to really kind of revel in and enjoy. And I think they're looking forward to the challenge.
Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but after watching an MLS side finally win this competition, and also seeing a couple really successful campaigns, like when Toronto went to the final, when LAFC went to the final, when Montreal went to the final, they've seen some close rivals of theirs, and of course Seattle going on and winning it. Does that give the group a little bit more belief that maybe this is truly achievable?
I think, this group has belief in themselves. I don't know what the belief is externally about what they could do, but definitely the players themselves and the coaching staff think they have the quality to, probably do the best that this franchise has ever done in Champions League. I don't think they have the belief that they're going to come out on top in the end. I don't think they're going to pull off the Sounders of 2022. I don't think they really believe they have that in them, but I do think that they feel that they can go in this competition, make some noise, and be competitive. And that's kind of what I expect from them. There's a lot of football to be played this season, and I think because they so rarely play in this championship, they're probably going to prioritize it more than some of the other ones. Say, for example, like the Leagues Cup.
And that's kind of what I asked Alex's question too, and I wanted to get your opinion because I do think it's a fair talking point. I talked about the correlation of teams doing really well in the Champions League and then their league play suffering. Do you think that there's going to be a point early on in the season where Sartini is going to look and be like, you know what, we just won a couple legs here, all our eggs are going to go in this basket? Or do you think that he's going to try to kind of play both sides?
Well, they've already made it clear that they want to be competitive in every single competition they're in. Now, I don't think that means they're going to field their first 11 in every competition they're going to be in, but I think for them, like the sort of the ladder of importance, the first thing they want to do this year is make the MLS playoffs. I think that's number 1 overall goal. Number 2 and maybe 2B would be Canadian Championship and doing well in Champions League. I think Leagues Cup is much further down. So with that in mind, there's a lot of games that are going to be on those bodies. A lot of tired legs out there. Their depth is going to be tested, but I think we'll see them really kind of focus on those regular season games that they feel are crucial to them making the playoffs. And then Canadian champions, the Voyageurs Cup is going to be hugely important because realistically, and I say this without any pessimism, but that's really the only trophy they really have a chance of winning. I mean, if they make the playoffs and make a miracle run, anything could happen, but it's that doesn't really happen all the time in MLS. I think it's, there's only a few low seeds that have gone on to win. I think Portland was like the last super low seed that went on to win the whole thing. But that's Portland. Vancouver historically has not been that kind of team. So I think they will focus on making the playoffs and then Canadian Championship and then probably the CONCACAF Championship.
And the Vancouver Whitecaps did have a pretty busy offseason, a lot of departures, a lot of new arrivals. And you mentioned depth, and you mentioned that quite a bit. Do you personally believe that they did enough to bring in and have enough depth pieces in the squad to compete on those four fronts that you talked about? Or do you think at some point in the season that it's going to really hit them hard?
It's gonna hit them hard for sure. It's interesting. They only brought in like from external like 3 new signings. We got Sergio Cordova, we got Matias Laborda, and we've got Yohei Takaoka. So that's only 3 players. They're 3 very important players, but it's only 3 players. They did bring up some guys from the first team, Ali Ahmed, Simon Beecher. These guys are quality young guys. I actually expect Ali to have a very good season this year. He's been knocking on the door since preseason last year. So I expect him to do really well. But I think it was more addition by subtraction for them. I think they got rid of some players they felt would be too much of a drop in quality when subbing on. I don't necessarily agree with that and that sort of summation that we've heard from them, but they definitely let a lot more players go than they brought in. I think back to 2019 when Mark Dos Santos came in and he completely blew up the team. And he brought in like 18 new guys, and it was an absolute disaster. I think as a club, they kind of learned from that. There has to be some kind of continuity. There has to be kind of some core players that you try and build around and build a club, and then sort of slowly bring in some other sort of quality pieces to kind of complement that. And I think they're kind of at that point. They've got the core players that they want, and they feel like they've added enough of those sort of ancillary players that they will have the depth to play, what could conceivably but unlikely be like 60 plus games in combined this season.
Now going into the Champions League, there's not a lot of experience with CONCACAF Champions League in the squad. You have Blackman, you have Tybert. Other than that, this is a pretty young squad and pretty inexperienced in this competition. Do you think that's going to factor in any way, whether it's good or bad?
Well, I think the youth has been they've been a young squad for several years. I think, last 2-3 seasons, they've been on average like one of the youngest squads in MLS. And youth, the good thing about youth is it's cheap. The bad thing is, like you say, they don't have a lot of experience. And I think last year, the youth kind of reared its head when there were games that they needed to settle down and show some quality, some tranquility, some tranquilo as the El Banda used to say with the Whitecaps. But they got a little too hectic, a little too out of sorts. Even kind of to the point we might have seen it a little bit last week when they gave up those 2 goals to Salt Lake, and they just kind of fell apart for like a 10-minute span, and that cost them the game. But I think those young players are a little more experienced this year. So I think that will translate into CONCACAF Champions League. I think they will have sort of the ability to kind of slow down their minds and sort of play within the game. There's going to be some tough venues that they're going to be going into. Going into a stadium in Honduras is not like going to New York and playing against Red Bulls in front of an empty stadium. It's going to be a shock to, I think, a lot of players. I'm sure some of the South American players are going to be used to it. The kids from Colombia, Debra Caicedo, Pedro Vito from Ecuador, they're going to be used to it. But I think that some of the North American guys might have their eyes open when they travel to play some of these games. So I definitely think, experience will play into it. But I think they have sort of, they're not as young as they used to be, but they're not experienced yet. They're kind of in between. So I think they're they'll do all right. Let's say that.
Yeah.
We'll do all right. That's my prediction.
They'll do all right. Yeah, CONCACAF stadiums can be crazy. I like the little shot in there at New York Red Bulls. It was nice. I caught it, but no, that's we're gonna end on though. We're gonna go to expectations, and it's gonna be your opinion, but I do want two different thoughts here. I want you to let me know what your bare minimum expectations are for the Whitecaps. Was it win the first round of 16, quarters, semis, and what do you think the fans' expectations are? And I want to see if these meet up to see if there's gonna be disappointment for maybe not going on a long run, or if they're relatively the same.
Just strictly with the regular season or with the CONCACAF Champions?
Just the Champions League.
Just the Champions League. I think they expect them to get past the first round as a bare minimum. I expect them to get past the first round as a bare minimum. And then, every year I start the season feeling like, optimistic and bullish. And then as the season goes on, you kind of start to see, where the holes are. And I kind of expect that to kind of happen again this year. But right now I'm kind of optimistic. I definitely think they will get past the first round. And I think most people expect them to get past the first round. And then the rest will depend on how things are going in the regular season. Is their depth real? Do they really have the legs and the bodies to sort of spread themselves across all these competitions? I think these questions will be answered in short order. So I think most people are pretty optimistic, especially after that first half last week. Alex probably pointed out we haven't seen the Whitecaps play like that since, I don't know, like the days of Pedro Morales. Like it was attractive, beautiful soccer. It was something we weren't used to. There was a lot of like, did we just see them do that? It was impressive. So they've got a quality team. I'm optimistic, and I think they're relatively optimistic too.
Yeah, and Alex said, and I quote, "That was one of the most beautiful halves of football I've ever seen," followed by one of the worst halves of football. Can't believe what I just saw, but either way, the Whitecaps will have to find some consistency if they want to do anything on any of those fronts, but especially in the Champions League, and it's going to be pretty exciting to see what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is all the time we have for in this preview. I want to give a big special thank you to my two guests. They were fantastic. JJ and Alex, you did an excellent job. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, as always, be sure to drop a like, drop a sub, comment down below. Let me know how you think the Caps will do in this year's edition of the Champions League, and as always, be sure to subscribe to One Soccer for all the best Canadian soccer coverage. My name is Josh Deming. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers, friends.